Luke Skywalker's composite mythos reveals him to be perhaps the greatest Jedi in history, as strong as Palpatine and as wise as Yoda. Looking through his beliefs, one would find that he was of the belief that the Jedi of the High Republic era were of good intention, but misguided. While Luke Skywalker was indeed a Jedi, his beliefs in the balance of the Force, as well as the demeanor a Jedi should have, differed greatly from his predecessors, as he, at times, actually encouraged attachments, going so far as to tell his prospective apprentices that it was okay for them to find love and start a family. He recognized that the Jedi were a group of people, not machines. While the Jedi mantra may have stated, "There is no emotion, there is only peace," this is inherently false, as all people possess some form of emotion, and this is generally what draws them to the dark side. Or more so, the suppression of emotion and personal freedoms that causes the call of the dark side, which itself touts personal freedom as a part of its counter mantra. "Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall set me free." Luke was wise enough to identify what the dark side truly was and understand that it's merely one side of a coin, and to remain truly in balance with the Force, one must naturally balance within themselves both the light and dark, if one wishes to truly find the will of the Force. Despite this, there are still those who would turn to the dark side for many reasons. Solo in canon was turned to the dark side after the temptation of Snoke had caused him to question his place in the Jedi Order, and with Luke having feared the darkness in his nephew, causing him to momentarily give in to fear, which we all know leads to anger, hatred, and suffering, and nearly kill his nephew. While in Legends, Ben's counterpart, Jacen Solo, turned to the dark side after a vision of the future showed his daughter corrupted by the dark side, and a galaxy ruled by an emperor who would be far worse than himself. But the true question is, what if Luke had fallen to the dark side before he had a chance to start any of this at all? Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. It should be noted that there are many ways to go about this, ranging from his final confrontation with Vader and the Emperor on the second Death Star down to his duel with Vader on Bespin. For me personally, I'm going to choose his battle on Bespin as the point that we can expect him to turn to the dark side. After all, it was stated by Yoda that this point in time was a dangerous time for Luke, as the pull of the dark side would be stronger. That and the revelation that his father was Darth Vader could possibly be the greatest temptation he possibly could have. So it seems likely that this is the best place to start. Let's begin there. Luke Skywalker, having had his vision of his friends, would go to Bespin to save them, and there Leia would call out to him that it was a trap. But without a second thought, he continues forward, albeit more cautiously. There he meets Vader and the two begin to duel. Eventually though, they would be forced out to the platform, and Vader would sever his son's right hand. It's then that he reveals his identity as Luke's father. Luke would do that classic shouting of denial, although he later searches his feelings under his father's guidance to see if it were true. Vader would ask his son to join him, but Luke instead would attempt to drop from the platform. However, Vader would do that one thing we all thought he should have and catch Luke with the Force. He would pull Luke back up to him and hold him in the air. Having caught Luke, he would return him to the carbonite freezing chamber and freeze Luke in carbonite just as he'd been commanded by the Emperor. After this, Luke is then transported to Vader's ship, where the frozen body of Luke is kept within Vader's personal quarters, just as one would expect. Leia and Chewbacca would escape Bespin with Lando's help and make their way out to the Rebel fleet sitting at the edge of the galaxy and consider their next moves. They would need to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt if they had any hope of finding Luke and standing up to the Empire. Meanwhile, Luke is being transported to Coruscant, where his frozen body is then brought into Palpatine's office under the falling rain. Very similar to how Vader had been following his duel with Obi-Wan on Mustafar. Entering the chambers, Imperial Red Guards would flank the Dark Emperor on both sides, the same Dark Emperor who had a sly smile on his face, having foreseen this very event occurring in a Force vision. An Imperial medic would begin, under Palpatine's orders, to put the young Jedi on defrost, and would then, along with the Red Guards, be commanded to leave the chambers. Luke would slowly begin to regain consciousness. He could not see, but he could hear, and what he heard were the faint voices of two people standing nearby. A deep mechanical voice, and a voice that sounded as if it had seen the passing of time eroding the shores of the galaxy. Slowly, these distant voices began to grow louder, as if he were returning to the present from the deeper recesses of his mind. He slowly could hear them speaking, and they were speaking of him. "You have done well, my friend," one voice would have said. "In bringing the son of Skywalker to me, you've not only produced us a new ally, but you've also begun to piece your own family back together. Are you pleased with this, Lord Vader?" The deeper voice would speak. "I am." Luke would weakly try to speak. "Father." He would hear the sound of heavy bootfall coming closer. "I am here, my son." "Where am I?" Luke would ask. "On Coruscant, within the Emperor's chambers." Luke would blink a few times. "I can't see." Vader would then speak. "Carbonite sickness. Your eyesight will return in time." Luke would speak. "Leia. Where is Leia? Where's Han?" "They are no longer of any concern to you," Vader would say. "Where are they?" Luke would demand. Palpatine would be drawing closer. "You will be pleased to hear that we do not know. Sometime after your capture, Leia escaped aboard a rebel freighter. As for Solo, he's been delivered into the hands of Jabba the Hutt." Luke would then question this voice. "Who are you?" Vader would introduce him. "This is the Emperor. He is your new master." Luke would then vehemently declare with all the strength that he could, "I will never join you." Palpatine would laugh and move back to his throne. "We shall see, Jedi." From this point on, Luke would be allowed to rest until he was fully recovered. By this time, Vader would be visiting Luke commonly. At first, Luke would be hostile, then passively ignoring him while attempting to meditate. But after some time, Luke would begin to engage with his father. This was the easy part. Vader knew personally from his training of Inquisitors what the standard procedure the Empire employed to break the will of the Jedi was. He had hoped to turn his son to the dark side through their bond, in hopes that they could avoid the pain and torture that would inevitably come. Together, they would argue philosophy, the past, the present, the future, their devotions, their bonds and relationships, but most importantly, they would debate the light and dark sides of the Force. Vader tried to help Luke understand the folly of the Jedi, as well as their beliefs in the weaker light side. Perhaps the light focused on wisdom, but it failed to compare in darkness, and it failed to go deep enough into the strange abilities one might consider to be unnatural. In the end, Vader would take Luke to the destroyed Jedi Temple, which currently was host to heavy Imperial presence to keep those who weren't of proper clearance out. Within, Vader would show Luke the library, packed to the brim with Jedi holobooks, each one salvaged by the Empire in hopes of using its contents for the very purpose they were now being used for. Vader showed them the constraints of the Jedi, how they failed to understand the humanity of each of its members, and would with cruelty force upon them rules that caused them to deny themselves. Was this no different from what the Sith did? The Sith would cause its members to refer to themselves by Sith names, as Vader now did. Anakin was dead. Vader was the one who killed him, and in killing his old self, he had now been reborn, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of Mustafar. But even then, denial was not required to be a Sith, as Palpatine still referred to himself by his birth name. The Jedi forced them, however, to deny their feelings and to lie to themselves. There was no difference between the Jedi and the Sith. The only difference was that, by doing nothing, the Jedi had allowed society to stagnate, while under the leadership of the Sith, the galaxy had never been so productive. Progression. Luke would refute this by stating that even if the Jedi were imperfect, the Sith were also imperfect. They had control of the galaxy, and it had turned into a living hell for those in the Outer Rim and for lower classes of people. This would be when Vader would state that they could change it. Together, they would be strong enough to overthrow the Emperor and claim his throne as father and son. And as father and son, they could make the galaxy anything they wanted it to be. If Luke wished to be the voice of reason, then Vader would be the voice of chaos. In this way, they could balance the Force and the universe by uniting the two concepts. After so long, and perhaps under the clouding of the dark side due to Palpatine's influence, Luke's mental barriers would wear down. He would be subjected daily to Sith stories that romanticized their deeds and actions. He would often be told these stories by Palpatine himself. starting with the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. It would be here that Palpatine would reveal to Luke that it had been through his manipulation of the midichlorians that Palpatine and Plagueis had learned to create life, and that the life they had created had become the being known as Anakin Skywalker. Luke would be startled by this revelation that Anakin's birth had been spurred on by Palpatine and his master. Through this point of view, the Emperor would try to establish a grandfatherly bond with the young Jedi, telling him it wasn't just his duty to the galaxy, but his birthright to rule beside him and Vader. Together with Vader, Palpatine would slowly break down Luke's inner defenses, and Luke's repulsion to the dark side would slowly lessen as he was desensitized to the evils through lies and excuses. Vader and Palpatine would promise Luke power and a voice in how the Empire would be run if he joined them. The rebels were attempting to destroy the system. Luke could reform it from the inside, and all he would need to do is embrace his passions and the things the Jedi had been trying to lock away from him, to join his father and grandfather in their empire. Eventually, Luke would submit, and they would begin to modify his training in the Force to incorporate more darkness. They would ease him into it, with Vader's hand being there constantly to help his son whenever he falls. This show of love and of familial connection would soften the feeling of wrongdoing in studying the line of thinking that had seen the death of millions. Vader would train with Luke, and they would go on pilgrimages to ancient Sith temples and sacred sites dedicated to the dark side, engrossing his son in the lore of the Sith. And finally, when the time had come to complete his training, he was issued one task. He was provided with a green kyber crystal from within the Jedi Temple and told to use his connection to the dark side and his passions and hatred to fuel him and bleed the crystal. This was a dangerous time for an up-and-coming Sith Lord. This was the time when the light side would attempt to draw him back, and Vader knew it well. Vader himself had nearly been swayed back to the light while bleeding his own crystal. But the death of Padme and the wounds he had gotten at the hands of Kenobi had fueled him and given him the passion and hatred he needed to overpower the crystal and make it bleed. He could only hope that his son was strong enough, but Palpatine would comfort his apprentice by stating that they had trained Luke well, and that his descent into darkness was both absolute and irreversible. Luke had dealt with issues with this. For days on end, he attempted to bleed his crystal, getting encouragement from Vader and Palpatine as he went, and told to remember all the times he was too weak to save others or himself. Luke would focus on these things and eventually bleed his crystal red. He was then allowed to construct a new lightsaber using this crystal. Almost as if to mock his first mentor, Luke would use the same hilt design as Obi-Wan. Luke had finally accomplished his turn to the dark side. His vestige had grown dark as well, much like his father, and he often would be found with a dark cowl similar to that the Emperor wore. A dark glove covered the metallic hand he'd been given as a replacement. To commemorate his achievement, he would return to Tatooine, where he would rescue Han Solo from the clutches of the vile gangster, Jabba the Hutt. He would appear, and most of this occurs the same as his scene did in Return of the Jedi. Except once he gets to Jabba, instead of pulling a blaster like he did, he would pull his lightsaber, as he never met up with R2-D2 before this time. He would still get dropped into the Rancor's pit, but he would have his lightsaber with him. All the while, Leia is surprised to see Luke again, especially carrying a weapon as he was, the same color as Vader's. Luke would take the Rancor apart in a similar style as Starkiller in The Force Unleashed. Luke, at this point, had grown so strong that such a beast is child's play. After this, he would cut his way out with his lightsaber and would slowly make his way back up. Along the way, he would encounter plenty of Gamorrean guards and bounty hunters. Boba Fett would also encounter Luke, but Luke would take him apart just as Windu had his father. Making his way back up to the gangster's throne room, Luke would still be carrying his crimson blade, his cloak still pulled over his head. His amber eyes, stained with the dark side of the Force, staring from the shadows. He would simply say, "You shouldn't have done that, Jabba." Luke would step closer to Jabba, hopping over the Rancor's pit and stepping up on Jabba's platform, severing the chain holding Leia to him. He would then turn to the slug in disgust, not even sure where to start cutting. He would let his anger make that decision for him and would utterly slaughter Jabba, much to Leia's horror. Once Luke was finished, he would deactivate his lightsaber and return it to his waist. He would then lower his cowl and turn to Leia and ask if she were alright with the kindest smile. Leia would look him over. "Luke, what happened to you?" He would smile. "I found my father, Leia. He trained me to use the Force in ways Obi-Wan and Yoda never could." Leia would, even without training, be able to sense how close to Vader Luke's affiliation in the Force was. "You've been training with Darth Vader." Luke would nod. "He is my father." Leia would be shocked. "Your father?" Luke would nod. "Indeed. There's no more reason to fight against the Empire. Instead of fighting against it, Leia, you should join it. It's better to reform it from the inside than to tear it down from the outside. We can salvage it." Leia would shake her head, mouth agape, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Luke, we can't salvage it. That's the point. My father tried. He failed the moment Emperor Palpatine dissolved the Senate and destroyed Alderaan." Luke nods. "But I'm so close with Palpatine. I'm the heir to the Empire. I'm his grandson." Leia was absolutely astonished. "How?" Luke would explain how Vader had been conceived. Leia would be in shock. "Luke, you can't honestly believe that this is the right path. Vader and Palpatine are manipulating you." Luke would seem to grow a bit angered by this. "I saved you. Don't you go turning against me here. I'm doing what's best for everyone." Leia would shake her head. "If that were true, you would have dethroned Palpatine a long time ago and let the Empire die." Luke's anger would cause him to lift Leia into the air by her throat. "Luke!" he would hear a voice call out. He would turn back to see Han Solo standing there by Chewbacca and Lando, holding onto Chewbacca's arm due to his own carbonite poisoning. "What are you doing to Leia?" Luke would look back and see what he was doing and lower her to the ground. She would hold her throat and look up at Luke with betrayal in her eyes. He would then turn and leave without saying a single word. He would return to Vader's flagship, the ISD Executioner, and there he would brood on this. The vessel would make its way to the forest moon of Endor, where it would hover in orbit as the second Death Star was in the midst of construction. Vader would come up to him and ask what's on his mind. He would confide in his father that he had alienated himself from the others. He began to wonder if the Empire truly was unsalvageable. Vader would then put his son at ease and say that Leia has been indoctrinated by the rebels' own dogma that wasn't too far from the Jedi's in saying, "It's my way or the highway." The Empire could be changed from the inside to become anything that it needed to be, even the Old Republic. Once they dispatched Palpatine, they'd be able to do anything they needed. Then, through action, Luke could prove to Leia that he was correct and welcome her into the New Republic. Luke would nod. The two would further conspire. They would then make their way onto the second Death Star, to the spire that served as Palpatine's throne room. Palpatine would be sitting on his throne, staring out to the stars. "I thought I told you to wait on the command ship," Palpatine would say as Vader and Luke drew closer. "I have sensed a disturbance in the Force. The rebels have infiltrated the forest moon." Palpatine would turn back. "Odd that I have not. Are you sure your feelings are attuned to this matter, Lord Vader?" Vader would nod. "They are, my master. My daughter is with them." Luke would look to Vader in surprise. "Sister?" He would think within himself. He would search his feelings. "Leia! Leia is my sister!" Palpatine would turn around to face the stars again. "Then you will go to the forest moon and find her. And when you find her, you will bring her to me." Vader would nod once more. "At once, my master." However, Luke and Vader would not leave. Instead, they would grow closer. The slow tapping of Palpatine's finger would stop. A long drawn-out silence would ensue as both father and son approached the Emperor. "Is there more on this matter that you wish to speak of?" Vader's robotic breathing would hasten a bit. "My daughter will be brought to the dark side, but she will not be brought before you, my Emperor. It is impossible for her to be turned to the dark side by a dead man." Vader's lightsaber would hiss to life as he would swing at Palpatine, slicing the swiveling throne in two. However, Palpatine was already gone. He was behind Vader. Luke would call out for him to watch out. Vader turned around to see Palpatine standing there with a grin on his face. Igniting a lightsaber he had hidden in the sleeve of his robe, he stood there ready to challenge Vader. Luke himself would ignite his lightsaber. Palpatine had known this moment would come, just as he had sensed that soon the Rebel fleet would exit hyperspace just outside of the range of the Imperial fleet. And yet, he was prepared for that as well. He had prepared for all things, including this duel. Vader recognized that Palpatine had just used Form 4, Ataru, to escape his attack. At this point, given how old the Emperor had gotten and how frail his body must be, Ataru would be the only style he could use alone. All other styles would need to be interwoven in. Vader mused within himself how Palpatine was like a twisted image of Yoda in every capacity. Vader himself was using Form 5, Jacen Solo, as was Luke. Like father, like son. Vader was wary of facing Palpatine due to his overwhelming might. However, he knew that if he and Luke worked in tandem, they might be able to bridge the gap. Together, Luke and Vader would strike out at Sidious, their blades clashing with the Emperor's. Each strike is heavily calculated. At first, merely probing his defenses, they reached the horrible realization that Palpatine's form seemed to possess no openings. However, Luke and Vader both through the Force could communicate the concepts to each other that even if his defenses were nearly impregnable, that two blades always outmatched a single one, and that if one could occupy it, the other could strike out with no resistance. Vader also volunteered himself to be the diversion. Vader was slow, but he was very strong, and he could easily hold Palpatine in place, or even overpower him at times. Luke was swift due to his youth, which made him the ideal person to get into the chinks that Vader would put into Palpatine's defenses. Luke tried to flank Palpatine, but Palpatine would use Force Lightning to keep Luke away, all while defending himself against Vader's strikes. This battle continues on in this way for quite some time, with Palpatine pridefully stating that he is the one in total control of the scenario, and that everything is working out in accordance to his designs. However, growing impatient with this lack of progress, Luke would switch to using Form 7, Juyo. This would make his attacks stronger, faster, and more unpredictable by fueling them with his emotions. This would press Palpatine back and cause him to break away from Vader and Luke, knowing that his split concentration is incapable of handling both Skywalkers at once. He would begin to rethink his strategy, all while slowly growing more and more impressed with the deep well of Force ability that Luke displayed. He seemed to be even more skilled in its usage than even Vader was in his prime. He reminded himself of Palpatine himself at that age, and for a moment he was back on that starship where he had slaughtered his family with the Force, all without having even been trained. It was then that Darth Plagueis would sweep in under the rug as the owner of Damask Holdings, an influential group on Palpatine's home planet of Naboo. As the battle went on for what felt like hours, it was obvious that Palpatine's age was catching up with him. He was, after all, in his late 80s. Palpatine, caught between Vader and Luke, would end up meeting his demise at the end of Luke's saber. His last words being, "Just as I had foreseen." Palpatine would then perish. Vader would stand there for a moment as he looked down at the corpse of the Emperor. Much like it had been against Obi-Wan on the first Death Star, Vader couldn't believe that his former master was truly dead. He would kick at the body with the tip of his boot, even going so far as to behead it with his still burning saber just for good measure. Upon seeing the Emperor dead, Vader could be at ease. He would place his saber back on his belt. "You know," Luke would say, "I once told you, Lord Vader, that the ability to conquer death was an ability only one had achieved. I lied to you." Vader would look back, a shiver running down his spine. Vader would look into the eyes of his son and could see it then. Luke would speak. "As I said, I was in complete control of this situation and had foreseen this from the start. He struck me down with all of his hatred, and now his journey towards the dark side is finally complete. And I am the dark side incarnate." Vader would attempt to pull his blade, but instead he'd be severed in two by the quick movements of Palpatine mixing Luke's youth with Form 4 Ataru, making his strike barely possible to see. Before Vader could even respond, he would already be falling down the shaft into the reactor core. Palpatine, having taken his new body, would make his way back to his throne and would grab the cowl Luke had discarded and would have raised the hood and looked out the window to see the rebel fleet coming out of hyperspace. He would smile. He'd press a button on the arm of his chair. "Fire at will, Commander." Down on the surface of the forest moon, Leia would be defending Han as he sliced his way into the shield generator. She would suddenly feel an incredible disturbance in the Force, signifying that something terrible had just happened. This feeling was so strong that even Han Solo stopped for a moment before looking back at Leia. Suddenly, she'd be sniped in the arm from a stormtrooper in the distance. Han would quickly rush over and put the small flame smoldering in the wound out before he's stopped by an AT-ST. Chewbacca would come out and shout for him to come down because she was injured, but then suddenly stop him. He had an idea. From this point, most of the ground battle remains the same. In the orbit of the Death Star, however, it becomes known that the Death Star is active. Due to this realization, Lando would tell Admiral Ackbar to engage the Imperial fleet at point-blank range, where they're more likely to survive for longer. Ackbar agrees and they engage the fleet. When the shield generator is destroyed, they're able to attack the Death Star. However, they do not yet realize the strategic location and purpose of the spire that houses the Emperor. Those that fly close to it would find themselves eradicated by a blast of lightning that erupts from it like a Tesla death ray. And those that managed to get by or take another path into the Death Star's interior, they would find that the main core would also be protected, as Palpatine would merely step to the edge where Vader had fallen and would send a blast of Force lightning down the shaft to the core. Any ship that entered the interior to attack the core would then be subjected to Force lightning. This would result in the destruction of the Millennium Falcon as well as the death of Lando Calrissian. Even with the shield generator down, the Death Star is far from defenseless. As Admiral Akbar had stated earlier, it was a trap, and due to the Emperor being prepared for this, the entire Rebel fleet is eradicated down to the last ship. The only ships that would not be completely destroyed would be the capital vessels that possess the leadership of the rebellion. Those would be captured by the Empire to make public examples of what happens to those who defy the Empire. With the rebellion in tatters, Leia and Solo would escape on the same Imperial shuttle that they came in on. Han reflects on the feeling he had before the mission, in which he said that he felt like he wouldn't see the Falcon again, and laments that it was true. He laments Lando, but yeah, the Falcon. Oh, the Falcon. He would look back at Leia and ask her where they would go. Leia shrugs as she sits there. Where can we go? Han begins to think of where they could go. He would then fly them back to Tatooine where they'd land and hide. Leia would be depressed from the loss they'd suffered and had seemingly lost hope. She would hear a voice behind her. "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope." She would turn back to see the ghostly shade of Ben Kenobi standing there. "You once said that to me," he said. "And now so I say to you. Help us, Princess Leia Organa. You're our only hope." Leia would then ask how she could be of any hope to the galaxy after the loss of the rebellion. Obi-Wan would mention that she was the daughter of Vader and brother of Luke. She would not be shocked. She would say that somehow she had always known. Obi-Wan would state that the Force flows strong in the Skywalker family. He would tell her that only she could stand up to the Emperor. He would tell her that both he and Yoda would impart over 10,000 years worth of Jedi knowledge to her, and that she needed to be ready. She would nod and be ready to go. She would tell Han and Chewbacca that she planned to go alone to train to become a Jedi. Han would think she's crazy, but he knows he can't stop her. And so Leia would go off to train, and Obi-Wan would lead her back to his hut that he had left behind. She would find it dilapidated and dusty. She'd enter the abode where she'd feel drawn towards a particular chest. She'd open it up as if the chest had willed her to. Inside, she would begin to search for the strange object that was seemingly calling out to her. She would find it, a lightsaber. She would hold it in her hands. She could hear a voice behind her. "That was once my master's." She would look back to find Obi-Wan standing there. "He would want you to have it. He'd be honored to be able to bring about the next order of Jedi." Leia would hold the hilt as it ignited into an emerald green blade. She would then commit herself to training. This would take quite a while. To be fair, it might take about 2 years for her to become confident enough with the lightsaber and abilities to consider challenging the Emperor. But once she would return to the group and say that she was going to challenge Palpatine. Han would ask her why she had to be the one to do it and why they shouldn't just run away from the Empire. She would shake her head and smile, stating that it was her destiny. Han would groan. "Destiny, the Force, what has any of this ever done for me? Destiny and the Force brought us to this point, caused me to lose the Falcon. You expect me to agree to losing you too?" Leia would smile. She would kiss Han and tell him that he wouldn't lose her. She would return to him. Han kissed her again. "Promise me." She would. She would then turn back to the shuttle and board it. She would look back as the vessel's ramp closed up. Han would call out to her, "Leia, I love you." She'd smile. "I know." The vessel would then lift off. Leia would use her connections within the few spies in the Empire to get landing codes for the Death Star, where she would board the battle station and begin to make her way to the spire. Her green blade flashing through the air, deflecting blaster bolts the closer she got. She would then find herself encountering Death Troopers and finally the Praetorian Guards that waited outside. Once she got through those, she made her ascent to the spire. She would enter the room and find the Emperor sitting upon his throne. He would turn around. She'd be surprised to see that the Emperor was Luke. Leia would be speechless. "Luke, is that you?" He would smile. "If only it were true. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural." Leia would gulp, unnerved by the sight of her brother being controlled by the spirit of Palpatine. She would activate her lightsaber. Palpatine would stand. "There's no need for that, my friend. Luke would rather you join him." Leia would be confused. "Luke is dead, Emperor. You killed him." Palpatine would shake his head. "No, he lives on within me." He would manifest Luke's personality into himself. "Leia." Leia would begin to sweat. Luke would continue. "Come, join us on the dark side. If you do, you'll find all the power you could ever want. You could change the galaxy for the better. We would offer a safe place for you, Han, and Chewie. You could be a princess again." Leia shook her head. "No, Luke died a long time ago. You may have his face and his voice, but Luke is dead. He died the moment he chose to join you." She would rush forward with her saber as Palpatine would bring his to bear. Palpatine was stronger now than he had ever been. How could he lose to her? He would be toying with her. He would easily swing his blade, leading her and threatening to kill her with every movement. Palpatine was enjoying this immensely. But he wasn't ready for what happened next. Leia's abilities would change a bit. She grew faster, and for a moment, Palpatine thought he witnessed Yoda behind her. She moved faster than ever before. Suddenly, when she had gotten into an opening, her form switched again to Form 7, Vapad, and Palpatine thought he could sense Mace Windu in the room. He could barely defend against all these attacks, and for the first time in years, he was afraid in the midst of a duel. Palpatine would grunt as he seemingly sensed all the Jedi killed since Order 66 standing behind her. He would forsake his lightsaber and go straight for Force Lightning. He would overpower her with pure strength in the dark side, but she would defend with her own blade and begin to push it back. Palpatine's body would be overwhelmed by the lightning and it would eradicate him entirely. However, even though his body had crumbled to ashes, the spirit of Palpatine remained as a large flaming ghost that hovered over the remains. It would rush Leia, intending to take her just as it had with Luke. Within her mind, she would see Palpatine there. He was attempting to dominate her, force his will upon her, and his will to live and rule the galaxy was strong. But in her head, she heard the voices of other Jedi speaking. "Go, Leia! Leia, go! You can do it! Defeat him, sister! Defeat him, sister! Don't give in to the dark side! Beat him you can! Believe in yourself you must!" With all of these voices cheering her on and remembering her promise to Han as well as her duty to the galaxy, she would push Palpatine back, her willpower overtaking his and banishing his soul to the netherworld of the Force. Leia would wake up on the ground and would stand. She would draw closer to the edge of the spire. This was where Palpatine stood when he unleashed his Force Lightning to protect the core from the rebels who had broken through the surface of the battle station. Maybe she could use it to destroy the battle station. She would focus all of her power, and then she herself would release a wave of Force Lightning down the spire. It was taxing. She had never done it at this level, but Yoda appeared behind her and spoke. "Always focused on what cannot be done. The Force, your ally it is. Call upon it, help you, it will." Leia closed her eyes and called upon the power of the Force. She opened her eyes and sent a blast down into the core of the station, destroying its core. When she knew she succeeded, she made her way back down to her ship. There was little resistance as it was every man for himself. She would board the shuttle she came on and escape. And as she escaped, she would see the second Death Star begin to explode behind her. She would set course for Tatooine to meet up with Han once more. And from this point on, Leia would help to reform the Empire into the New Republic. She and Han would eventually have a child together that they named Ben. While the First Order might still rise, it wouldn't be as strong because Palpatine wouldn't be there. That being said, staying and training with his mom, Ben would likely never turn to the dark side, and would help Leia reform the Jedi Order, and a new golden age would begin. Or so I think. What do you think though? Do you agree? Or do you have another theory? Let us know in the comments below.
Did you enjoy our video? Well then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.